It was a cold Tuesday evening in October when Daniel first noticed her. The rain had been falling all day, turning the streets gray and empty. Most people hurried past his small music studio without a second glance. But this girl, she just stood there. Her face was pressed against the window, her breath making little circles of fog on the glass. Daniel was finishing up a lesson with one of his regular students, a teenager who was working through a difficult piece by Chopin. The music filled the small room, but Daniel found his eyes drifting to the window again and again. The girl couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Her jacket was too thin for the weather, and her hair looked like it hadn't been brushed in days. She carried a backpack that seemed stuffed to bursting, like it held everything she owned in the world. When the lesson ended and his student packed up to leave, Daniel walked to the door. He opened it slowly, not wanting to frighten her. But the moment the door moved, the girl jumped back like a scared animal. Her eyes went wide, and for a second, Daniel thought she would run. He didn't say anything at first. He just smiled and leaned against the doorframe, letting the warmth from inside drift out into the cold evening air. "You like piano music?" he asked, keeping his voice soft. The girl nodded. She still wouldn't meet his eyes. "How long have you been standing out here?" She shrugged. "A while." Daniel studied her for a moment. There was something about her that pulled at his heart. Maybe it was the way she held herself, trying so hard to look tough when she was clearly freezing. Maybe it was the hunger in her eyes when she looked past him at the piano inside. "What's your name?" he asked. "May," she said quietly. "My name is May." "Well, May, I'm Daniel. Would you like to come inside and warm up for a minute?" She hesitated. He could see the battle happening behind her eyes. Every instinct was probably telling her not to trust a stranger. But the cold was biting, and the piano was right there, and something in his voice must have felt safe enough. She stepped inside. Daniel's studio wasn't much to look at. Just a small room with a piano, a few chairs, and shelves lined with music books. The walls were covered with photos of his students at various recitals over the years. In the corner, there was a small desk where his daughter usually did her homework while he taught. Speaking of his daughter, she poked her head out from the back room the moment she heard voices. "Dad?" "Who's that?" "This is May," Daniel said. She was listening to the music outside. "May, this is my daughter, Hannah." Hannah was 7 years old, with her father's kind eyes and her late mother's curious spirit. She looked at May without any of the awkwardness that adults might feel in this situation. To her, this was just a new person, and new people were interesting. "You were standing in the rain?" Hannah asked, her nose wrinkling. "That's silly. You could have just come inside." May didn't know how to respond to that. She just stood there, dripping slightly on the wooden floor, looking at the piano like it was something precious and untouchable. Daniel noticed the way her eyes kept drifting to the instrument. "Do you play?" he asked. May shook her head. "No, I just like listening. I've been coming here for a few weeks now. The music sounds nice from outside." A few weeks. That meant she had been standing in the cold for weeks, just to hear the muffled sounds of piano lessons through the window. The thought made something twist in Daniel's chest. "Would you like to try?" he asked, gesturing to the piano bench. May's eyes went wide. "I don't know how." "That's okay. Everyone starts somewhere." She approached the piano like it might bite her. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a long moment before she finally pressed down on one. A single note rang out, clear and bright. She pressed another, then another, picking out a simple melody that Daniel recognized. It was the piece his student had been playing earlier, the Chopin Nocturne. She wasn't just pressing random keys. She was playing back what she had heard, finding the notes by ear, her small hands moving with an instinct that made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. May pulled her hands back like she had done something wrong. "I didn't learn. I just remember the sounds." Daniel had been teaching piano for 15 years. He had seen talented students before, but this was different. This was the kind of raw, natural gift that came along once in a generation, if you were lucky. "May," he said carefully, "where do you live?" The question made her go still. For a moment, Daniel thought she wouldn't answer. "Around," she finally said. "My grandmother and we stay at different places. Right now she's sleeping at a shelter a few blocks from here. She's been sick, so she sleeps a lot." A shelter. Daniel's suspicions were confirmed. This child was homeless. Hannah, who had been watching the whole exchange with wide eyes, suddenly spoke up. "You don't have a house?" May shook her head, her jaw tight. She was trying so hard not to look ashamed, not to look weak. Daniel recognized that look. It was the same look he had worn for months after his wife passed away, when he was trying to hold everything together for Hannah's sake. "Are you hungry?" Daniel asked. May hesitated, then nodded. He went to the small refrigerator in the back and pulled out the sandwich he had packed for his own dinner. He handed it to her without a word. She took it, and for just a second, her tough exterior cracked. Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped it, while May ate. Hannah sat down next to her and started chattering about her day at school, about her favorite cartoon, about the cat she wanted, but her dad wouldn't let her have. May listened, and slowly, the tension in her shoulders began to ease. Daniel watched them from across the room, his mind racing. He was a single father, barely making ends meet with piano lessons. He had no business getting involved in this girl's life. There were proper channels for this kind of thing. Social services and shelters, and people who were trained to help. But then May finished her sandwich and looked at the piano again, and he saw the longing in her eyes. The same longing he had felt as a boy when he had first heard music and known it was his whole world. He made a decision. "May, would you like to learn to play?" "For real?" She looked at him like she didn't understand the question. "I could teach you," he continued. "Tuesdays and Thursdays after my other students leave. Free of charge." Her mouth opened, then closed. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do that?" It was a fair question. Daniel thought about it for a moment before answering. "Because I think you might have something special," he said. "And because everyone deserves a chance to find out what they're capable of." May's eyes filled with tears. She blinked hard, refusing to let them fall. She was so young, but life had already taught her that tears were a weakness she couldn't afford. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, thank you." She left a few minutes later, disappearing into the rainy evening like a ghost. Daniel stood at the window and watched her go, wondering if she would actually come back. Hannah tugged at his sleeve. "Is she going to be your new student, Dad?" "I think so, sweetheart." "She's nice," Hannah said simply. "I hope she comes back." Daniel hoped so too. He didn't know it yet, but that decision, made on a rainy Tuesday evening, was about to change everything. Not just for May, but for him and Hannah too. Some moments in life look small when they're happening. It's only later that you realize they were the beginning of something that would reshape your whole world. That was one of those moments. May came back that Thursday, and the Tuesday after that, and every lesson day for the next 2 months, that Daniel learned things about her slowly, in small pieces. She never offered information freely. It came out in quiet moments, between scales and exercises, when her guard was down and the music had softened something inside. Her grandmother's name was Rose. She was 68 years old and had been battling cancer for almost 2 years now. The treatments had eaten through their savings, then their home, then everything else. They had been living in shelters, and sometimes on the streets for close to a year. May never complained about any of this. She spoke about it the way you might describe the weather. It was just the way things were. What struck Daniel most was how she protected her grandmother. She would skip meals so Rose could eat more. She would stay awake at night in the shelters, keeping watch, making sure no one bothered the old woman while she slept. She was 10 years old, and she had already learned to carry weight that would crush most adults. Daniel found himself thinking about May even when she wasn't there. He would set aside extra food, telling himself it was just in case. He started keeping a blanket in the studio, saying it was because the heating wasn't reliable. Hannah began asking every morning if today was a May Day. The two girls had become inseparable during lesson times. Hannah would finish her homework early, just so she could sit with May at the piano bench. Sometimes they would play simple duets together, giggling when they hit wrong notes. Other times, Hannah would just lean her head on May's shoulder and listen while the older girl practiced. It was good for Hannah, Daniel realized. Since her mother had passed away 3 years ago, Hannah had become quieter, more careful. She didn't make friends easily at school. But with May, she opened up in ways Daniel hadn't seen in a long time. One evening in late November, there was a knock at the studio door after May's lesson had ended. Daniel opened it to find an elderly woman standing in the cold. She was thin, almost fragile, wrapped in a coat that had once been expensive but was now worn at the edges. Despite everything, she held herself with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place with her circumstances. "You must be Daniel," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm Rose, May's grandmother." Daniel invited her inside immediately. May rushed to her grandmother's side, her face a mixture of worry and surprise. "Grandma, you should be resting. The shelter is far from here." "I needed to walk," Rose said, settling into a chair with some effort. "And I needed to meet the man who has been so kind to my granddaughter." She looked around the small studio, taking in the photos on the walls, the worn piano, the stack of music books. Then her eyes landed on Daniel, and she studied him for a long moment. "May plays for me sometimes," Rose said. "At the shelter, when no one is using the old keyboard they have in the common room. She's getting better every week. I wanted to thank you for that." Daniel shook his head. "She's doing all the hard work. I've never seen anyone learn so fast." Rose smiled, but there was sadness in it. She reached into her coat and pulled out a photograph, its edges worn from years of handling. She pressed it into Daniel's hands. "I want to show you something," she said quietly. Daniel looked at the photo. It showed a younger Rose, maybe 20 years ago, standing in what looked like a mansion. Beside her was a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, sitting at a grand piano that probably cost more than Daniel would earn in 10 years. The room behind them was filled with expensive furniture, crystal chandeliers, the kind of wealth that existed in a different world from this small music studio. "That's my daughter," Rose said. "Victoria, May's mother." Daniel looked up, confused. May had never mentioned her mother. Not once. And this photo suggested a life of incredible privilege, which didn't match anything about their current situation. "I don't understand," Daniel said. Rose glanced at May, who had gone very still. "Go help Hannah with something, sweetheart." "I need to talk to Daniel alone for a minute." May hesitated, then nodded. She took Hannah's hand and led her to the back room. Daniel could hear them whispering, but his attention was fixed on the old woman in front of him. "Victoria was a gifted pianist too," Rose began. "Just like May, she had everything. Talent, opportunity, a family who loved her. But when she was 22, she met a man, Richard. He came from old money, the kind of family where wealth had been passed down for generations. He was charming, handsome, and he made Victoria feel like a princess. Rose paused, her eyes distant. They got married within a year. I had my doubts, but Victoria was in love, and what mother can stand in the way of that? For a while, things seemed fine. They had May. Victoria's career took off. But then Richard's true nature started to show. He was controlling, manipulative. He wanted Victoria to be a trophy, not a partner. When she started building her own business, becoming successful in her own right, he couldn't handle it. What happened? Daniel asked. They divorced. It was ugly. Richard came from powerful people, and he used every weapon he had. He threatened to destroy Victoria's company, her reputation, everything she had built. He told her if she fought for custody of May, he would make sure she lost everything. And Victoria, she was so focused on her empire by then, so changed by all those years of fighting, that she made a choice. Rose's voice cracked slightly. She chose her business. She let Richard have May. She told herself it was temporary, that she would come back for her daughter once she was strong enough to fight. But she never did. The months turned into years. Victoria became one of the most successful businesswomen in the country. But she became someone I didn't recognize anymore. Cold, hard, unreachable. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. So you took May. Rose nodded. Richard didn't really want her either. She was just a pawn to him, a way to control Victoria. When he remarried and started a new family, May became an inconvenience. He was going to send her to boarding school, somewhere far away, where he wouldn't have to think about her. I couldn't let that happen. So I took her and I ran. Does Victoria know where you are? No, and she can't know. Rose gripped Daniel's hand with surprising strength. If Victoria finds out, she'll come. Not because she loves May, but because she sees her as something to acquire, to control. My granddaughter is not a trophy. She's not a photo opportunity. She's a child who deserves to be loved for who she is, not what she represents. Daniel looked toward the back room, where he could hear May's soft laughter mixing with Hannah's. This girl, who stood in the rain to hear piano music, who gave up her meals for her grandmother, who was teaching herself to survive in a world that had given her nothing. She deserved so much more than what life had handed her. I won't tell anyone, Daniel said. I promise. Rose's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I know I don't have much time left. The doctors say the cancer is spreading. I need to know that when I'm gone, May will have someone looking out for her. Not for money or status, but because they actually care. She looked at Daniel with an expression that cut right through him. You're a good man. I can see it in the way your daughter looks at you, in the way May talks about you. Please, when the time comes, don't let my granddaughter become a ghost. Don't let her disappear into a world that will use her up and throw her away. Daniel didn't know what to say. He was barely keeping his own life together. He was a single father running a struggling music studio, not someone equipped to take on this kind of responsibility. But when he thought about May, about her talent and her courage, and the way she had already wormed her way into his heart, he knew there was only one answer he could give. I'll protect her, he said. Whatever happens, I'll do everything I can. Rose squeezed his hand one more time, then slowly stood up. She called for May, and the girl came running, immediately tucking herself under her grandmother's arm to support her dot as they walked out into the cold evening. Daniel stood in the doorway and watched them go. He had just made a promise he had no idea how to keep. But somehow, standing there in the dim light of his small studio, he knew it was a promise he would die before breaking. Hannah appeared at his side. Dad, is everything okay? Daniel put his arm around his daughter and pulled her close. I don't know, sweetheart, he said honestly, but I think it's going to be. 3 months passed, and May transformed before Daniel's eyes. Not just as a pianist, but as a person. The scared girl who had stood shivering outside his window was still there somewhere. But now there was confidence growing alongside the fear. She smiled more. She laughed more. Sometimes, when she played, she would close her eyes and let the music carry her somewhere, far away from shelters and sickness, and all the hard things in her life. Daniel decided to organize a small recital at the community center downtown. Nothing fancy, just a chance for his students to perform in front of family and friends. Most of his kids were nervous, but excited. May was terrified. "I can't do it," she said, shaking her head when he told her about it. "Playing here is different. Playing in front of strangers is something else." "You play in front of me and Hannah all the time," Daniel pointed out. "That's not the same. You're not strangers. You're—" She stopped, struggling to find the right word. "Family?" Hannah offered from across the room, where she was supposed to be doing her math homework. Mai looked at her, then at Daniel. Something shifted in her expression. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. It took 2 more weeks of gentle encouragement before May finally agreed. She would play one piece, Debussy's Clair de Lune. It was ambitious for someone who had only been learning for a few months, but May had practiced it obsessively. Daniel had heard her play it dozens of times, and every time it got a little more beautiful. The night of the recital, Rose was too weak to attend. The cancer had been getting worse, and most days she barely had the energy to sit up. But she insisted on helping May get ready. She brushed the girl's hair until it shone, found a clean dress from a donation bin that almost fit, and pressed a small locket into her granddaughter's hands. "Wear this tonight," Rose said, "for courage." May opened the locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of herself as a baby, held in the arms of a woman whose face had been scratched out. May stared at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Who scratched out her face?" she asked quietly. Rose hesitated. "I did, a long time ago, when I was angry. I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stand to look at her, knowing what she had done." May closed the locket and put it around her neck without another word. She kissed her grandmother's cheek and left for the community center with Daniel and Hannah. The recital was held in a small auditorium that could seat maybe 100 people. By the time they arrived, it was almost full. Parents chatted in groups, younger siblings ran up and down the aisles, and Daniel's students clustered backstage, peeking out at the crowd with nervous excitement. May stood apart from the others. She kept touching the locket around her neck, her eyes fixed on some point in the distance. Daniel walked over and crouched down beside her. "You're going to be great," he said. "What if I mess up?" "Then you mess up, and the world keeps turning. Nobody here is expecting perfection, May. They just want to hear you play." She nodded, but he could see her hands trembling. Hannah squeezed May's arm. "I'll be in the front row. If you get scared, just look at me. I'll make a funny face." That actually got a small smile out of May. "Promise?" "Promise." The recital began. One by one, Daniel's students took the stage. Some played well, some stumbled, but everyone got their applause. The parents beamed. The kids bowed proudly. It was exactly what a small community recital should be. Then it was May's turn. She walked to the piano like she was walking to her own execution. Her face was pale, her steps stiff. She sat down on the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched out, and Daniel felt his heart clench. Then May took a breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first notes of Clair de Lune floated through the room like something delicate and precious. May's hands moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone her age. The music swelled and softened, rose and fell, painting pictures in the air that everyone could see, but no one could describe. The audience went completely still. Parents stopped whispering. Children stopped fidgeting. Even the youngest kids, who had been restless all evening, sat frozen in their seats. Daniel watched from the side of the stage, and he felt tears prick at his eyes. This wasn't just talent. This was something deeper. May was pouring every ounce of her pain and hope and longing into that piano, and the music that came out was the most honest thing he had ever heard. When the final note faded away, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then the applause erupted. People rose to their feet. Some of them were crying. Hannah was jumping up and down in the front row, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. May opened her eyes, looking dazed, like she was waking up from a dream. She found Daniel's face in the crowd, and he gave her a proud nod. A real smile broke across her face then, the kind of smile he had never seen from her before. What neither of them noticed was the woman standing in the shadows at the back of the auditorium. She was tall and elegant, dressed in clothes that cost more than most people in the room earned in a month. Her face was partially hidden behind dark sunglasses, even though they were indoors and it was evening. She stood perfectly still, watching May with an intensity that bordered on pain. When the lights came up for intermission, she was gone. The next day, a man appeared at Daniel's studio. He wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase that probably cost as much as Daniel's car. His smile was polished, professional, and somehow unsettling. "Mr. Chun?" he said, extending a hand. "My name is Robert. I represent the Ashford Foundation." Daniel shook his hand cautiously. "I've never heard of it. We're a private organization dedicated to supporting young talent in the arts. We heard about the remarkable young pianist who performed at last night's recital, and we'd like to offer her a full scholarship to the Whitmore Academy of Music in New York." Daniel blinked. The Whitmore Academy was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. A scholarship there would change May's entire life. "How did you hear about her?" Daniel asked. "It was just a small community recital." Robert's smile didn't waver. "We have scouts at many events. Talent like hers is rare. We'd hate to see it go undeveloped." Something about this felt wrong. The timing was too perfect, the offer too generous. Daniel had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and right now they were screaming at him. "Who exactly runs this foundation?" he asked. "We're funded by Ashford Industries. I'm sure you understand that our donors prefer to remain private." Ashford Industries. The name meant nothing to Daniel, but the evasiveness, the polished deflection of every question, that meant something. "I'll need to think about it," Daniel said, "and talk to May's family." Robert produced a business card from his pocket and placed it on the piano. "Of course. Take your time. But opportunities like this don't come along often." He left without another word. Daniel stood in his empty studio, staring at the card. Something was very wrong here. He could feel it in his bones. That night, after Hannah was asleep, Daniel sat down at his computer and typed Ashford Industries into the search bar. The results loaded, and his blood ran cold. Ashford Industries was a massive technology corporation worth billions of dollars. It had offices in 12 countries, thousands of employees, and a CEO whose face stared back at him from the screen of a Forbes magazine profile. Her name was Victoria Ashford, and she had May's eyes. Daniel read through article after article, his hands growing colder with each one. Self-made billionaire, ruthless businesswoman, recently divorced from Richard Ashford, though she had kept the name for the company. Net worth estimated at over $4 billion. He clicked on an image search, and there she was. The same woman from the scratched-out photograph in May's locket. Older now, harder, but unmistakable. May's mother had found them, and Daniel had no idea what to do next. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table until the sun came up, reading everything he could find about Victoria Ashford. Business profiles, magazine interviews, society page photos of her at charity galas, always alone, always with that same distant look in her eyes. He wanted to hate her. It would have been easier if he could, but the more he read, the more complicated the picture became. There were hints in some of the older articles about a difficult divorce, about custody battles that had dragged on for years. One interviewer had asked about her daughter, and Victoria had ended the interview on the spot. The journalist described her expression as shattered before she walked out. None of this changed what she had done. She had abandoned May. She had chosen money and power over her own child. But Daniel was starting to wonder if the story was more complicated than Rose had told him. He decided not to tell May anything. Not yet. The girl had enough to worry about with her grandmother's health getting worse every day. Rose could barely get out of bed now. The shelter staff had started talking about moving her to a hospice, and May had been crying herself to sleep every night, though she tried to hide it. A week passed. Then another. A business card from the Ashford Foundation sat on Daniel's desk, untouched. He kept expecting something to happen, for Victoria to show up at his door with lawyers and demands. But there was only silence. Then Rose collapsed. It happened on a Tuesday morning. May had left for school, and Rose had tried to get up to use the bathroom. She fell and couldn't get back up. By the time the shelter staff found her, she was barely conscious. Daniel got the call just before noon. He closed the studio, picked up Hannah from school, and drove straight to the hospital. May was already there, sitting in the hallway outside the emergency room. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen. She looked so small in that plastic chair, smaller than she had ever looked before. Daniel sat down beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him without a word, and he felt her whole body trembling. "Is she going to be okay?" Hannah whispered. Daniel didn't know how to answer that. The doctor came out an hour later. He was a tired man with kind eyes, who had clearly delivered this kind of news too many times. He explained that Rose's cancer had spread to her liver and lungs. There was nothing more they could do, except make her comfortable. She had days, maybe a week at most. May didn't cry. She just nodded, like she had been expecting this all along. Maybe she had. Maybe she had known for months that this was coming and had been bracing herself in whatever way a 10-year-old could brace for losing the only family she had left. They let her into the room to see Rose. Daniel waited outside with Hannah, giving them privacy. Through the small window in the door, he could see May sitting beside her grandmother's bed, holding her hand, talking quietly. Rose's eyes were closed, but her lips were moving slightly, like she was trying to respond. That's when Victoria arrived. Daniel heard her before he saw her. The sharp click of expensive heels on linoleum, the hushed voices of hospital staff getting out of her way. He turned, and there she was, walking down the corridor with two men in suits flanking her like bodyguards. She looked exactly like her photos, but also nothing like them. The woman in the magazines had been polished, controlled, untouchable. This woman's makeup was smudged. Her hair was slightly out of place. And her eyes, when they met Daniel's, were wild with something that looked almost like fear. "Where is she?" Victoria demanded. "Where's my daughter?" Daniel stood up and positioned himself between her and the door. "You need to stop. Get out of my way. I have every right to see her. She's my child. She's a child you haven't seen in years. You can't just show up and expect to walk back into her life." Victoria's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about my situation. I know you abandoned her. I know her grandmother has been living on the streets trying to protect her. I know May has spent the last year thinking her mother didn't want her. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Pain, maybe. Or guilt. But she pushed past it, her voice turning cold and hard. My mother had no right to take her. What she did was kidnapping. I could have had her arrested. I still could. I have lawyers who could make sure May comes home with me tonight. Home? Daniel stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. What home? A penthouse where the staff raises her? A boarding school where she'd be out of your way? She doesn't need your money, Victoria. She needs a mother. And from everything I've seen, you don't know how to be one. Victoria raised her hand like she was going to slap him. Daniel didn't flinch. For a long moment, they just stood there. Two strangers fighting over a little girl who deserved better than both of them could offer. Then Victoria's hand dropped. Her shoulders sagged. And when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Is she happy? The question caught Daniel off guard. He had expected threats, demands, legal action. Not this. What? May, is she happy? Does she have friends? Does she laugh? Does she... Victoria's voice cracked. Does she ever talk about me? Daniel thought about the scratched-out photograph. The way May tensed whenever mothers came up in conversation. The way she never asked questions about the woman who had given birth to her. She doesn't talk about you, he said honestly. I don't think she knows how. Victoria closed her eyes. A single tear escaped down her cheek, cutting a line through her perfect makeup. I didn't want to leave her, she said. You have to understand. Richard, my ex-husband, he was going to destroy everything. My company, my reputation, everything I had spent my whole life building. He said if I fought for custody, he would make sure I lost. And I believed him. I thought if I stepped back, just for a little while, I could get strong enough to fight. I told myself it was temporary. She opened her eyes, and Daniel saw the full weight of her regret. But temporary turned into months. Months turned into years. Every time I tried to reach out, Richard blocked me. He told May I didn't want her. He poisoned her against me. And then my mother took her, and I couldn't find them. I've had investigators searching for almost a year. I only found her because someone posted a video of that recital online. Daniel didn't know what to believe. Part of him wanted to dismiss this as excuses, the rationalizations of a woman who had chosen wrong and was now trying to rewrite history. But another part of him, the part that had seen the way Victoria's hands were shaking, wondered if maybe the truth was more complicated than he had assumed. Rose is dying, he said finally. She has days, maybe less. May is in there saying goodbye to the only person who never left her. Whatever you want to say, whatever you want to do, it needs to wait. Victoria looked toward the door. Through the window, she could see May's small form hunched over the hospital bed. Can I at least see her? Just see her? Daniel hesitated. Then he stepped aside. Victoria walked to the window. She didn't try to go in. She just stood there, watching her daughter through the glass, one hand pressed against the door, like she could reach through it somehow. May didn't notice. She was focused entirely on her grandmother, holding Rose's hand and singing something soft and quiet. A lullaby, maybe. Something from a time before everything fell apart. Victoria watched for a long time. Then she turned and walked away without a word, leaving nothing behind but the faint smell of expensive perfume and a silence that felt heavier than anything Daniel had ever known. He looked at Hannah, who had been watching everything with wide, confused eyes. Dad, she said, what's going to happen now? Daniel wished he had an answer. Rose passed away on a Thursday morning, just as the sun was coming up. May was holding her hand when it happened. Daniel was there too, sitting in the corner of the room, keeping watch like he had promised he would. The old woman's last words were for her granddaughter. She told May that she was brave and strong, and that the music inside her was a gift that nobody could ever take away. She told her that being loved wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, even when things were hard. And then, with her final breath, she whispered something that made May cry harder than she had ever cried before. Forgive her. When you're ready, forgive her. May knew who she meant. The funeral was small. Just Daniel, Hannah, May, and a few people from the shelter who had known Rose during their time there. They gathered in a quiet cemetery on the edge of town, under a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or shine. Victoria came. She stood far away, near a tree at the edge of the grounds, watching from a distance. She didn't try to approach. She didn't try to speak. She just stood there in her black coat, looking more alone than anyone Daniel had ever seen. May noticed her halfway through the service. Her body went stiff, and Daniel saw her hands ball into fists at her sides. But she didn't say anything. She just turned back to the grave and finished saying goodbye to her grandmother. Afterward, when everyone else had left, May walked over to where Victoria was standing. Daniel started to follow, but Hannah grabbed his hand. Let her go, Dad, Hannah said quietly. She needs to do this by herself. So Daniel watched from a distance as his student, this brave little girl who had been through more than most people face in a lifetime, stood before the mother who had abandoned her. He couldn't hear what they said, but he could see May's shoulders shaking. He could see Victoria drop to her knees in the grass, not caring about her expensive clothes, reaching out but not quite touching her daughter. He could see the years of hurt and silence and longing hanging in the air between them like something physical. Then May turned and walked back to Daniel. Her eyes were red, but her face was calm. She wants to talk to you, May said. Daniel approached Victoria slowly. She was still on her knees, her face wet with tears, looking up at him with an expression that had none of the coldness he had seen at the hospital. She looked broken, completely and utterly broken. My mother made me promise something, Victoria said, her voice rough. Before she took May and disappeared, we had a fight. A terrible fight. I said things I can never take back. But the last thing she told me was that if I ever found May again, I had to earn her back. Not with money, not with lawyers, with time, with presence, with love. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. I don't know how to do that. I've spent so many years building walls, protecting myself, turning into someone who doesn't feel things. I don't know if I even remember how to be a mother, but I want to try. If May will let me, if you will help me. Daniel looked at this woman, this billionaire who could buy anything in the world except the thing she wanted most. He thought about all the reasons he should say no. The hurt she had caused, the years she had been absent, the fact that she was a stranger trying to walk into a life she had voluntarily walked out of. But then he thought about May, about what Rose had whispered with her dying breath, about the locket with the scratched-out face that May still wore around her neck every single day. I can't make that decision for her, Daniel said, but I can tell you this. May doesn't need a CEO. She doesn't need someone who schedules her into a calendar between meetings. She needs someone who will sit with her when she's sad, who will listen when she talks about nothing, who will show up at her recitals, not because it looks good, but because there's nowhere else they'd rather be. Victoria nodded slowly. I understand. Do you? Because if you're going to do this, you have to do it right. You get one chance. If you disappear again, if you break her heart again, I will make sure you never get near her. I don't care how many lawyers you have. For the first time, something like respect flickered in Victoria's eyes. You really love her, don't you? Like she's your own. Daniel didn't hesitate. She is my own. Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. She and Hannah are sisters now. My home is her home. That's not going to change, no matter what happens between you two. Victoria stood up slowly, brushing the grass from her knees. Then maybe we can figure this out together. I'm not asking to take her away. I just want a chance to be part of her life. Whatever that looks like. Whatever she's willing to give me. The months that followed were hard. There were setbacks and arguments and days when May refused to see her mother at all. Victoria had to learn everything from scratch. How to have a conversation that wasn't about business. How to cook simple meals when her chef wasn't around. How to sit through a cartoon movie without checking her phone. But she kept showing up. When May had a recital, Victoria was in the back row. When May got sick with the flu, Victoria canceled a trip overseas to bring her soup. When May finally broke down and screamed at her about all the years of abandonment, all the birthdays missed and nights spent wondering why she wasn't good enough, Victoria just held her and cried and said sorry over and over again until the words lost all meaning and became something more like a prayer. Hannah helped too, in ways that only a child could. She told May that having a mom who made mistakes was still better than having no mom at all. She knew this because she had lost her own mother when she was 4, and there wasn't a day that went by when she didn't wish she could have her back. Mistakes and all, that conversation changed something in May. She started letting Victoria in, just a little. A phone call here, a lunch there, a slow, careful rebuilding of something that had been shattered for years. 1 year after Rose's death, May performed at a concert hall in New York. It was a showcase for young musicians, and she had been invited after a video of her playing went viral online. The auditorium held 2,000 people, and every seat was full. Daniel sat in the front row with Hannah on one side, and on his other side, holding Hannah's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, sat Victoria Dot. When May walked onto that stage, she looked out at the audience and found their faces. Her teacher who had believed in her when she was just a homeless girl in the rain. Her little sister who had shared everything without being asked. And her mother who was learning, day by day, how to love her the way she deserved to be loved. May sat down at the piano. She placed her fingers on the keys, and she played. The music that filled that hall was unlike anything she had ever played before. It was grief and joy and forgiveness, all woven together, a story told without words. A letter to the grandmother who had saved her and the mother who was trying to come back and the family she had found in the most unexpected place. When the last note faded, the audience rose to their feet. The applause was deafening, but May barely heard it. She was looking at Daniel, who had tears streaming down his face, and at Victoria, who was clutching her chest like her heart might burst, and at Hannah, who was jumping up and down and waving like crazy. Afterward, a reporter asked May about her journey, about living on the streets, about discovering her talent, about everything she had overcome. May thought for a moment before answering. Music isn't just notes on a page, she said. It's the language my grandmother taught me. It's the gift a stranger gave me through a rain-covered window. It's the bridge that brought my mother home. I used to think family was about blood. Now I know it's about who stays, who shows up, who loves you even when it's hard. She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Daniel had ever seen. I have 2 families now, and that makes me the luckiest girl in the world.